So let's start with how autism is viewed in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And first, could you just let our listeners know what city you guys are in?
We're in London. There's another office in Edinburgh.
Okay, got it. So what's the understanding of autism where you are?
So, autism in the UK, it's a mixed bag. I believe the services. So, in my age group, 1994, I know people that my age that needed to get diagnosed, that really had to push for a diagnosis. I believe because they were girls and it wasn't as obvious as the boys, who tended to be a bit more disruptive. The girls could be very quiet and they'd see it more as, oh, she just really loves reading, or, oh, look, she's collecting lots and lots of toys. It's so motherly. And they'd characterize it as a motherly, quiet nature rather than an autistic sort of nature. So a lot of people I know tended to get diagnosed a bit later in life, such as myself. And some of the provision after you turn 18 drops off. We have local councils and local authorities that are supposed to be in charge of different areas. And it tends to be very organised when you're in school. And once you become an adult, people find that a lot of the services bottom out from underneath you and you're suddenly in the adult world. But we all know that autism is a lifelong condition. It doesn't just stop when you're an adult.
Mm-hmm. And how old were you when you were diagnosed?
I think it wasn't until it was in 2016. So I would have been 22 and I'm 26
Mm-hmm.
now.
And okay, well, I definitely want to touch on that again later in the conversation.
Sure.
Okay. So what kinds of services are available for families from the point of diagnosis? Russ, do you want to speak to this since you have some experience at that phase?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just touching back on Stephanie's point is absolutely true. Is often a key determinant in individuals or families receiving a diagnosis is often perseverance from the individual or the family. So often the system, whilst it is in the NHS, it's a great system. It's not often set up for the amount of kind of diagnosis we now see, and there's lots and quite a large increase in diagnosis, and waiting times are often kind of 2 to 3 years, if not more, for a diagnostic assessment in the NHS. So families, individuals are waiting an extremely long time for support, and during that time, that individual may need additional support. That they're not getting because they don't have that diagnosis. So we have to kind of that's probably one area where I think we're still kind of not quite there yet. Even though we do, I think compared to kind of maybe 5-10 years ago, we certainly as a mentality shift potentially, and a kind of there is more education I think on autism, and there's more awareness than maybe there was. But as I think we said, there's still kind of there's a bit more to go because we still see that individuals with autism are marginalised in society, whether that's through stigmatisation, whether it's equal access to the job market, which is why Auticon kind of exists, health inequalities, and kind of the involvement in the criminal justice system. So it's mainly as a victim or witness rather than necessarily a kind of a perpetrator. But it's all these different kind of elements are really really kind of come together to show that we're not quite there yet. But there are, as you say, there are services there to support people, and I think the first port of call really is primary care. So GP services should be, and I think are getting better at setting up to kind of understand what autism looks like. That like Stephanie said that everyone is different and everyone's experience of autism is different, and to knowing the right questions to ask. Hopefully that there is a feeling that primary care is more able, more flexible and adaptive to kind of understanding when a referral for a diagnostic assessment is necessary. But there are other services such as the National Autistic Society.
Primary care, if you're from the US, primary care is like your family doctor.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. And family doctors. So that's the doctor you start with and who then signposts you to the other more specialist areas.
Got it.
Yeah, absolutely. So someone like the GP or kind of nurses would usually be considered kind of primary care. But we also, if we think about families of young children, so SEN SENCO, so special educational need coordinators in schools, they'd also be a really key point of contact. And if an individual or family isn't already known in school to have an SENCO coordinator, then I think it's often about making sure that the school or the primary care services are aware of the support that can be offered to individuals and families. But the NES are a really good source of both research, diagnostic assessments. They do also do workplace assessments, so a really good source of information and guidance for anyone that's thinking or going through a diagnosis. Or is kind of has questions about potentially autism, and they're also really good at kind of signposting to local charities, local services in the person's area. There's also another charity called Ambitious About Auticon, Autism, that do a similar thing. So around education, information, advice, residential services, and employment support. So they would be a good source of support. But there are actually lots of forums and social and kind of social media accounts where lots of people can understand. Get information and seek support from kind of peer groups around what they should do. But I guess a really good first start would be kind of something like the NHS website in the UK, where they can go to see what avenues are the best for them, really.
Mm-hmm. And all of this is provided by the government, or do families have to pay out of pocket?
We have a national insurance system, so we do end up paying for it. It is socialized medicine. I know in the US, I mean, the NHS can be amazing in some ways. If you go to the doctor's office and say you have chest pains, they will see you in a minute, less than a minute. But for other things, if you want, for instance, a hip operation, you need to get a new hip or something like that, people have been known to wait 2 years and they're incapacitated for that long, so they're unable to work. So the US system, it's better if you want to work and get back into work quicker. Whereas the UK system is amazing in some areas, but I believe David Cameron, who was one of our last prime ministers, a couple prime ministers back, he wanted to pledge £4 billion extra pounds into mental health in the NHS because that's been chronically underfunded. The wait times have been horrific for mental health care. So it's not all doom and gloom because that £4 billion is trickling through now, and hopefully that will help for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just touching on Stephanie's point, as I said earlier, the waiting times for a diagnosis, for example, are quite long. So whilst the individual wouldn't pay for the assessment, lots of times people would seek private diagnosis assessments, which they would invariably pay for. So I mean, part of the need for having getting time frames or waiting lists kind of shorter is that people wouldn't necessarily have to be paying for private diagnosis. But yeah, expediency is really kind of the point, really, that if people have a real need for a diagnosis and are going to find that useful, having to wait 2-3 years is often a lifetime. So yeah, there's lots of things that can be changed.
You could be out of work for that long.
Yeah. And there was only one point relating to kind of different options that are available. I think we didn't mention access to work. We do it's government funding support for any employee. They can access support from access to work. So if anyone has consider themselves to have a physical mental health disability, they can talk to the employee about access to work through, and you can have workplace assessments which look at the environment. So we do our own workplace assessments at Auticon, but if you talk to your employer about access to work, they'll be able to kind of it's the employer that would go through the access to work process, but that would be for you, and you can get support in terms of reasonable adjustments. You can actually get general mental health support as well. And yeah, that's can be a really useful source of support for individuals that feel that they do need support at work.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's been a lot of progress, but there's still ways to go in some areas.
Yeah.
What are some misconceptions about autism that you still run into?
That it's incredibly dramatic and it's super obvious, and that if you smile or make eye contact, you can't be on the spectrum. If you see any of my friends that are on the spectrum, it's not super obvious. In fact, pretty much most of the consultants we have at Auticon, once you get to know them, they all are just really interesting, cool people, and especially the ones that don't talk as much as, say, me or another more extroverted person on the spectrum.
You've been watching Autism Knows No Borders. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know what you think in the comments section. Click here to watch this interview in its entirety. You can also find us on your favorite podcast app. Tune in each week for engaging conversations of how people across the globe are inspiring change and building community. Thanks for watching. Take care.